All right, hello AP Seminar. So today we are going to talk about perspectives and points of view. So like we saw in the quest, one of the big areas that we focus on is understanding multiple perspectives to really see the full picture of an argument and to really see the full extent of a claim and follow through to ensure that we're seeing everything, all sides of everything, because when you see just one side, you're not getting the full argument. So we're going to do that through a fun activity, not a fun activity, a fun lecture, I should say, about Larry and his llama. So let me share my screen so you can see. So this is the story of Larry and his llama. So we're going to understand perspectives and points of view, and they are two different things. So let me walk through. All right, so first we start out. I'll pause for a second. I just want you to take a look at this picture, which is ever more relevant now, considering he is now the next in line to the throne, considering the news we just got yesterday or today, or depending on when you're watching this, of the Queen's passing. And so we look at Prince William and we wonder, okay, that's not something necessarily princely for him to do, not very royal for him. But of course, we're seeing it from one perspective. So let's take a look at it from another angle. And we come to find out that Prince William is actually holding up 3 fingers as opposed to his middle finger. So it's not what we thought from one angle. It's a totally different story from another angle. So thus showing us the significance and reasons why we need to look at things through multiple perspectives to really see the full picture. We should never look at it from one side because we miss a lot from just one side. So when you think of perspectives in AP Seminar, I want you to think of stakeholders. And so those are people that have stake in the game, right? They're individuals that are directly affected or part of the conversation that's being had. Sometimes you may look at them as professions, so teacher, principal, administrator, and those can very well be stakeholders, but sometimes it can be different than that. It can be more specific than that. It can be less specific than that. So don't only think of professions, but it is a nice way to kind of put it in your brain, that sort of like generalization of professions. So the definition, there you are, people or groups that have an interest in the topic under discussion. Again, they have stake in the game. On the other side of that, you have their points of view, or POV, as you'll see it called. And a point of view is going to be the person's opinion about something. So their perspective is their role, it's them as the person. Their point of view is what they think about something. So it's their perspective, it's their belief about the topic under discussion. I like to talk about this in regards to teachers. So I teach English. I also teach research, right, which you're in, but I'm also an English teacher and have been for many years. And I've taught middle school English as well. There's another teacher here at my current school that similarly has had a career trajectory similar to my own. We're relatively the same age. We had the same way into teaching, not studying it in school, but coming into it later after a career doing something else. We are both the same perspective. However, we both share different points of view about a lot of issues. So it's important to look at perspectives and points of view as different because someone who's the same perspective is able to have a different point of view. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at the multiple perspectives, but also being open to multiple points of view within a perspective. So this is the story of Larry. So this is Larry, and Larry has a friend, a llama. So Larry loves his llama, and that's Larry's llama there. However, Larry, and by the way, this was all borrowed from an AP conference that they had in 2016, and AP teachers around the world, I'm assuming the world, but at least in the United States, are using the same story because it's a nice way to see perspectives. So Larry loves his llama. But Larry lives in the city of New York, or New York City rather. And so New York City, as one might imagine, is not super conducive to llama life. Llamas are pretty big and they require lots of space. And Larry especially lives in a little townhouse, so it's not super large. But Larry loves his llama, treats his llama well, and lives in his little townhouse. Well, when you have a llama, what do you need to do? Well, you got to feed your llama. And when you feed your llama the hay, which you can't just get at any old grocery store, so you're going to find new places to get that hay. When you feed your llama hay, they tend to poop. So Larry's got to be considerate and he's got to find ways to dispose of that poop. And so when there's too much poop, though, and hay can be kind of smelly too, you get angry neighbors, and angry neighbors lead to angry landlords. And so Larry's got to deal with angry landlords, along with retrieving the hay and disposing the poop for his llama. But Larry loves his llama, and Larry wants to make sure his llama's happy. And so Larry helps his llama be happier by finding him a llama friend. Well, when two llamas are friends, they sometimes get romantically involved and thus have llama babies. And when you have lots of llamas, more than just Larry's llama, yeah, you have Larry's llama's friend and Larry's llama's friends and Larry's llama's children, they're going to need more hay. And because they eat more hay, they're going to also have more poop. So Larry has a little bit of an issue on his hand, right? Because he's got to dispose of all that poop. He's got to get all that hay, and he's got to keep his neighbors happy. So in Larry's townhouse, he realizes, though, he can't just leave this poop on the streets. And so Larry does do the right thing, and he hires out a cleaning crew to come and haul the poop away. And so they pick up the poop, and he pays them to come clean up the feces as much as possible to avoid angering his neighbors. But anytime there is something different happening in the city, you've got inspectors and people who are keeping an eye out. Sometimes when animals are involved, different groups try to make sure that the animal is being treated correctly. And so Larry's also going to deal with those people who are keeping an eye on him. And of course, there is some money to be had there, right? Larry's got to pay for the trash to be hauled away. So those individuals are getting some money from that. But he's also got to pay for the hay that he's bringing in. So there's a lot of parties of interest there. So when we look at the story of Larry the llama, we need to identify the perspectives that were present in the story. So I'm going to pause for a second, or you should pause. I'm not going to pause. Pause for a moment and just talk and discuss about what perspectives, remember the perspectives of the stakeholders, what perspectives are involved in the story of Larry and his llama. Okay, so I gave you enough time to hopefully hit pause and have your discussion. And now I want you to identify if there are any missing perspectives or stakeholders. Sorry, I should have done this before you paused, but that's okay. So are there any missing? Anything that wasn't in the story that might be missing? So go ahead and pause again and fill in any gaps of people who weren't in the story, but are also perspectives that have an interest in Larry and his llama. Pause there. Okay, so now as we go on, just something to think about. You don't have to have a discussion on this right now, but why is it important to consider all perspectives, right? That should be a relatively easier question to answer. And how do these kinds of considerations affect your approach to research? This is what you want to keep in your mind: is why do we need to have multiple perspectives? Why do we need to consider multiple points of view, especially when it comes to research? So here are some of the perspectives you may have listed for Larry and his llama and their points of view, the positives or negatives. They'll get more specific on the points of view in the next slide, but you've got your pet owner, so Larry. You've got your suppliers because they've got to bring in the hay. You've got your farmers that are growing the hay and they're receiving the manure. You've got your fertilizer industry that's also, you're getting the manure, cleaning up the manure. And then you've got those who are not looking positively on the situation, like the neighbors, because of the smell, like the landlord, because he has to deal with the neighbors and potentially the destruction that might happen from having llamas in a townhouse. The health inspectors that are making sure everyone is following the city codes and ordinances, and then your animal rights activists who are making sure the llama is being cared for adequately. The llamas do also have a perspective, and we'll talk about that in a second. So even though something can't necessarily voice its perspective, it still has a perspective. We just have to find its voice. So here you can see the points of view that those different people might have. They're all over the place, and they're all valid too, right? Larry has a right to own his llama. It's a free country, as we often hear in America, and so he should be able to have his llama if he wants to. And people deserve to make money off of that llama, but you also have people who are concerned about the health. So poop is carrying diseases, who are frustrated with having to live their life with someone else's choice. And so again, all of these are valid points of view because they come from perspectives that have an interest in it. So we have to listen to all the different points of view and make sure that we're making that any determinations with all of them in mind. So we are going to now take a look, and I want you to pause here. This one's definitely a pause here, and I want you to list out any perspectives you think are involved in these two issues. So you'll have two different lists. One being what is physician-assisted suicide. If you don't know what that is, take a Google, find out what that might be. It's a research class, so I want you to be able to find out these things. But who are the perspectives in physician-assisted suicide? And then I also want you to look at who might be the perspectives in oil drilling. And remember, just like in Larry Llama, it's not necessarily the people who are directly affected, like doing the actual task itself. There are people who are indirectly affected, but are also have an interest in it. So make sure you keep that in mind when you form your list. So pause here, make your lists. Okay. So hopefully you pause there, and we'll now move in to see what you might have included and what you might have missed. So in physician assisted, you've got your doctors, your patients, your family members, religious leaders, your hospital staff and admin, your hospice care, insurance companies, drug companies, and suppliers. And each of them will have a different viewpoint of it. And some may be positive and some may be negative, and some may be alternate points of view in the same category. Some doctors may be in favor of physician-assisted suicide, and some doctors may not be. You have to keep that in mind. With oil drilling, you've got the companies, the oil companies, you've got your local fisheries, your wildlife associations, your residents, or the tourists that are in those areas, your rig workers, politicians, economists, your EPAs or environmentalists, your scientists, health experts, and your engineers. So hopefully you had most of those listed, and if you may have more, because again, there are lots of perspectives that sometimes we forget about when we're looking at an issue. Okay, so that was the Larry and the Llama perspectives. So the key takeaway from that is that you've got perspectives and points of view. Perspectives are your stakeholders, and points of view are the opinions that those stakeholders have. We want to look at all different perspectives, multiple perspectives, and we have to be open to seeing different points of view within those perspectives. So keep those both in mind. The next thing we're going to look at is what we call dinner conversations, and this is going to turn into what you're going to work on as an assignment, but I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to it as well. So an easy way to think about how we are bringing in those multiple perspectives is to look at our arguments or claims as a dinner conversation. And so let me share my screen so you can see. So when you're introduced to multiple perspectives, it's not enough to just have different points of view. Viewpoints, you need to explain the relationship. You need to know why you're bringing the right people to the table. We can't just bring any old Joe Schmo off the street. We should be definitely bringing in the right people to have the conversation. And so we think of it like a dinner conversation. So things to ask when you're inviting your guests to your dinner party is, who are they? Why would they get along with other guests? And notice, now I say get along. Everyone at your dinner table should get along. They don't have to agree, right? We want to make sure that they can have a conversation, that their voices that we can talk to, but they don't necessarily have to agree. And so what I used as an example in my in-person class for this was what political discourse has become now, right? You have some polarization. At some points, they're so intense that they're just shouting at each other and they're not talking to each other. And that's not a productive conversation. Nothing can be learned from that because they're just yelling at each other. When people are open to having dialogue, they may never agree, and that's absolutely acceptable, but they are able to have a conversation to better understand either their side or the other person's side. And then you want to ask, what contribution would the person bring to the table? Because we want to make sure that they're bringing something unique and that it's not just the same echo chamber over and over again. We want to bring in new perspectives that have a different take on something that we're looking at. So we look at it in this way. So you start with a topic, so an overall topic. You then will narrow your topic into a specific lens, and I'll post the lenses for you, but we have some specific lenses in AP Seminar that we use to really narrow our research in, because again, it's hard to see the entire globe. It's easier to focus in on specific points of the globe. So we want to make sure we're focused and so we can see little bits and pieces to understand the overall picture. And then when you have your lens, you then pick your perspectives that go under each lens. So an example would be here. Oh, I went too far. Would be if we're looking at ADHD. Again, it's a big topic. It's hard to see all of it at once, so we have to narrow our focus. And so we can narrow the focus into education. And when we look at ADHD through education, we've got 4 perspectives we can bring in. One is the teacher, the principal, parents, and then psychiatrists, all of which have stake in the game. They're all stakeholders, and all of which belong in the conversation, have something unique they could bring to the conversation. So what you're going to do, and I'll explain it in the instructions to the assignment as well, is you're going to build a table for a specific topic, and I'll list that there. But you're going to put your topic in the middle, and then you're going to invite 4 guests to your table. The lens will be through education. I'm going to leave that the same, so you're going to automatically have your lens will be education based. But then you're going to talk about who the perspective is, so who the person is, so teacher, principal, administrator, those types of roles. What's their point of view? Do they think positively of this? Do they think that we should have this course in school because it's beneficial for this reason, right? What is their point of view on the issue you're going to be assigned? What makes them credible? What gives them that credibility? Because we want to make sure we're listening to voices that are credible voices. What makes them relevant, right? Why should we care about what they're talking about? Are they currently teaching? Because if they're a teacher from 30 years ago that haven't taught a class in 30 years, then they're no longer a relevant voice in the situation for education. We want to make sure that they're individuals that are still relevant to the conversation. And then once you have your 4 plotted, you're going to actually compare the similarities and differences that they have between the other guests at your dinner table. And so that's what you're going to work on to talk more about the perspectives. So the assignment will be on Schoology for you to work on. If you have questions, I'll put a discussion post there for you as well. You feel free to email me. And that is all for today.